You co-founded the computer vision construction team at Google.
That visual aspect is huge, and it's huge across all pillars of construction: safety, quality, planning, cost.
Reviewing schedules of GC, what are some of the things you look at?
What expectations am I setting up at the request for proposal? How are we trending against that schedule? Do they have a production plan or a lean or a pull plan?
Help to communicate or articulate better information.
My biggest piece of advice would be know your owner. If you're working with Google or Microsoft on the data center side, and they want that open line of communication.
Look ahead schedule, metrics you should have in that summary.
This can be pulled together in a very simple one-pager. You have a little screenshot of your critical path up top. You could have a nice little chart that shows whatever pumping out of that production system you have in PPC, and here's a bar chart that shows what your constraints are.
Schedule update and presenting it to a senior leadership.
At that level, it's either informational or a decision. This is where we were, this is where we are now. This is if we continue on the path we're going to. Here's the couple things we're tracking. Here's the couple mitigations we have in place.
Any tech supplementing the data or the information you get from PCs.
They'll walk out, scan your site, compare it to past sites, and compare it to the model, and then give you progress off it. LLMs and other sorts of things, and to your schedule checking.
Career progression and how you should plan it.
Like, people like to view life as this like linear trajectory up, but what really is there is life is like this like tree branch of roots. Kind of start defining what some of these outcomes are. That's going to drive 90% of your decisions.
In this episode of Constructing Tomorrow, we have Micah Piippo. Micah is a scheduling manager at Intel, where he leads diverse teams and drives initiatives that enhance construction planning and scheduling practices. Prior to Intel, he worked at Google as a project controls technology lead. He also developed the Datacenter Delivery and Execution scheduling program for them. In this episode, we discuss the differences in core construction versus tech company, key metrics for reviewing schedules, articulating and communicating effectively with schedule updates, current scheduling technology with visual progress and advanced analytics, the potential of computer vision in construction, developing a career progression plan, and much more. With that said, I bring you Micah.
Hello, Micah. Thanks for being here and welcome to the podcast.
Glad to be here. Super excited.
Yep, I'm super excited as well. For those of you who don't know, Micah also runs a podcast called as Beyond Deadlines, where he covers and shares insights about scheduling and planning, and that's what we're going to cover here as well. But before we dive into all the crazy things, I want to start at ground level and ask you the basic difference between planning and scheduling.
Whew, gonna get it. We're gonna start the pitchforks out early. Yeah, so there's a ton of different definitions out there. You can get super technical and booky, but at this point, from my experience, there's no real difference. Okay, yes, you could say scheduling is what you do in a software and it's more detailed and laid out, and planning is high level and more spread out. But let's quit confusing people. Let's quit creating these divides between people and getting pedantic about words. Planning and scheduling is pretty much the same thing. All you're doing is looking out in time and trying to coordinate, execute, and strategize different scopes of work.
Got it. And would you say that there are certain tasks within the planning realm that don't overlap with scheduling?
Certain tasks that don't overlap with the... Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think like if you want to take a definition, I guess for me, for planning, how I look at planning is you're looking at the project as a whole and you're looking at longer views of what's going to happen. And you're stepping back and you're taking a breath and you're saying, based on the information we know today, these sorts of puzzle pieces can fit into things. And you're going to run into certain scenarios where if you go down into like take it to a next level into scheduling, they may not be as applicable. One example may be you're just looking at high level resource curves, so total people on a job site. And then as you start to step that down into what we'll call like the scheduling world, that's going to maybe break out into different sorts of trades. So I think there is some nuance there, but again, I don't want to sit here and say scheduling is different from planning and planning is different from scheduling. It just creates this divisive scenario where I think we lose the point that you should be planning and scheduling on a project.
Awesome, got it. And so you worked in like a core construction company as well, and then you worked at Google and now at Intel. I wanted to understand, is there any differences that you have seen between these two industries, like a core construction company versus a tech company?
Oh yeah, it's called free food. No, I'd say the biggest difference outside of some of the perks that a big tech company offers you are you're working owner side, versus contractor side. And to me, at a certain point in your career, or at least I enjoy it more working on the owner side. You're in the driver's seat a little bit more. You can set out different sorts of strategies. You can look at different sorts of ways projects are built, and so that's really the biggest difference. Where, and then I've always been a tech fan. I've always, I love tech, and so working for Google was a dream job, and then continuing on working at Intel is another dream job where you're just at the front line of tech. And while I'm just part of building the buildings, and I don't actually really understand what most of these software and engineers are doing, and other engineers that are building the chips, it's just exciting to me.
Yep. And now that you mentioned, like obviously working for an owner might have some benefits, I would like to understand from your perspective. I would assume you're doing a lot of data center projects. So when it comes to reviewing schedules of GC, what are some of the things you look at?
The first thing isn't what I look at. If I'm an owner, I'm setting the table. So I'm setting up what the expectations are. And if you're doing this in a partnership with someone, which is how I view it, that's how you're going to get the best project there. I wouldn't just come in and start blasting your schedule. I'm going to take a step back and say, what have I done to set up the scenario we currently have today? And so at a certain point in time, we did an RFP. What expectations am I setting up at the request for proposal at the very beginning that's going to let you know what the tone of this is going to be? And then as we move forward with that, we're going to work together on a contract. And in that contract, there should be a planning and scheduling specification. What is in that specification? And so by the time I actually get a schedule, we should already be lockstep in understanding where it's going. And on uh, I also like to kind of work hand in hand. So hey, show me that early example of your schedule. Let me see what you're working with, how it's structured. Are you meeting my coding? Do you have everything in? So like that's, but if you just drop me in, let's say you just parachuted me in and handed a schedule in front of me, I'm just going to ask you for the contract. I'm going to look at the schedule. I'm going to look at the end dates, look at the variance of those end dates. And then I'm going to ask you for like 5, 6, 7, 8 updates. And I'm going to look at how are we trending against that schedule, and then the last one I'm going to ask, do they have a production plan or a lean or a pull plan or some place where they're coordinating and executing work? And based on those couple things, I can get a pretty good indication of where the project's finishing on time or not. At this point, I don't, that's the number one question I think is most important for a planner schedule. Like, when are you finishing? And then we can get into all the schedule stuff, the lags, the leads, the constraints, all that sort of thing. But that's pretty much how my analysis would go.
Got it. Or what are some of the tips you would like to give the schedulers in the GC world that, hey, if you do this, it might help to communicate or articulate better information from a schedule?
My biggest piece of advice would be know your owner. Have a good line of communication and understanding with your owner. You're going to be in scenarios where if you're working with Google or a Microsoft or one of the big, tech companies on the data center side, they are heavily involved in their projects and they want that open line of communication, and you'll get that feedback two ways. If you just sit in the back corner of your trailer and you never reach out, you're going to run into more problems than if you actually just reach out to them and say, hey, I'm working through this start of the schedule. Is this how you want to see it? Does this make sense to you? Boom, there you go. Uh, some owners don't want to be involved in that sort of stuff, and so you got to read the room. Then the second one I would always say is, schedules or fabrications of what is happening out in the real world, right? So you're going to take 3, 4,000, 5,000 activities. You're going to name them all sorts of things. And most of the time they have no direct tie to the physical world. And so I'm always looking for what is your math that is backing up your assumptions in your schedule. There should be something I can point to. Like my favorite schedule activity review, kind of going back a little bit to your earlier question. I just grab a schedule, I point to activity, I'm like, hey, Kevin, activity like R746, 25-day duration. Why? And they'll be like, well, I'm like, why? I don't, why? And what I'm trying to get to is like, did someone at some point say, hey, we have 5 columns here and a column takes us, you know, 5 days, 25 days. Great. Now we're at math. Now we're at a point where we can check our variables and it's just not a guesstimate. And so I think for general contractor schedulers out there, having that understanding of that's how you build a really quality schedule. And there's a ton of different ways to go do that through quantity tracking, through production planning, pull planning, tack planning. You know, there's loads of ways to build up that schedule, but that would be the second, piece I would give advice to.
Yeah, I love the advice about having the logic behind each schedule activity and not just like a guesstimate, right? Other question, you mentioned scheduled reviews. I wanted to, and this is a twofold question. The first one is when you're doing look ahead schedule. So obviously you prepare like a summary for it. So what are some of the key metrics you should have in that summary just to articulate that information better to the project team? And my second question is when you're doing like a schedule update and presenting it to a senior leadership, at that time, what are some of the key metrics you should put in that report? Because obviously, when it comes to senior leadership, you're not going to give them a 1 hour long rant. These are the details and everything. You need to be precise to the point. So, just trying to understand these questions.
So for the look ahead, should I just assume that that's your project manager you're supporting, like your construction manager, project manager?
Yes.
Yeah. So for that group, again, it depends what sort of schedule we have set up, like what environment we have. I mean, there's tons of different ways to go do this, but let's say you have a very well oiled, what I'll call level 4 schedule machine that is a production plan. So they are actually looking at the flow of work. It's crew based, it's contractor based, and, it's daily boots on the ground type planning, right? So, I'm going to be looking at that piece of work and pulling that information together. And you're really looking for your PPC and making sure that the daily tasks are being hit, that there's like resources available, and then you're going to be looking at your misses. You're going to be looking at your constraints, like what are your constraints and the things that you're hitting against constantly at the boots on the ground level. That's going to probably roll into your level 3 schedule, right? Where you're going to have a little bit of a critical path or some sort of trajectory that's going to show you where you're headed. And so you're going to take that information that you're getting on the daily basis and you're going to put it in and look at where you're headed and see if this is directionally where you should be heading. Are you meeting the progress you're going to be heading? And oftentimes this can be pulled together in a very simple one pager, right? You have a little screenshot of your critical path up top that like here's your big activities going to your L1 milestone. You could have a nice little chart that shows whatever pumping out of that production system you have, your PPC, nice little lines, and then here's a bar chart that shows what your constraints are. I think for most project managers you're probably there, uh, and that'd probably cover it, and that's what I'd be looking for. Now when you go to the executive side, that's a different ballgame. That's not, you know, they're not concerned with what's happening, down on the boots on the ground. Most often, the only thing they want to know is when is the project going to finish and is it on time? And so, to me, that is really, uh, there's a lot of different ways you can go answer that question. But I guess the way I would summarize it is certainty. What is the certainty that you're going to hit that milestone? And more often than not in the construction industry, you're not. And so you're going to be bringing some bad news to the table.
What would you say would the certainty be? Would it be a percentage or a scale?
Yeah, so I guess going to your analysis, my favorite thing to look at is you take that lower level production rate that you're hitting. You look at, so there's different sorts of like metrics you can look at, but all you're trying to do is grab a couple of them and then you take the duration of the project and you apply it across time, right? And so, like, if you have a 10-month project and you're performing at a 50% rate, let's say that's, PPC, quantity install, P6 activity, that is not a 10-month project. And more often than not, trends continue over time. And you don't, like, you always see the graph, right? Where it's like this nice hill shaped curve. And it's like, oh, the project will be perfectly on time. And then the curve just starts growing higher and higher until it gets to the point where like it can't go anymore. And then it pops and it gets pushed out. And so what I'm trying to do is show that push out ahead of time. And so you grab 3 or 4 of those metrics. Like performance against duration is a great one. If you're just in P6, you're looking at what did people say they were going to do versus what they did, right? And then I mentioned a couple others, and I just extrapolate that over time. You can look at that on a back of a napkin math like I just did. Like I think in my example, if it's a 10-month and you're hitting 50%, that's going to be like a 20-month project. If I got my math right, it's a little early here. But you can also take that duration uncertainty and you can run risk analysis on your schedule. So you can plug that into a piece of software and that will tell you, running a Monte Carlo, this is how far it's going to go out. But the problem is when you do that with an executive, they don't want to hear that. They don't want to hear, you know, and so you're going to have to work collaboratively with a team, and you're going to come to a point where either this is mitigatable, you can have mitigations for them, or it's not. And usually you end up in a kind of a bucketed place. But to me, that is a very simple, just this is where we were, this is where we are now. This is if we continue on the path we're going to, where we are going to be. Here's the couple things we're tracking. Here's the couple mitigations we have in place, you know. And then if you have options, so if you have contingency you can spend or acceleration options, whatever, that's where you're bringing them up a decision, because you're really at that level, it's either informational or a decision, and you want to be very clear what you're bringing, because it can get confusing if people get frustrated if they think they're getting an option to help and they don't have one. It's very confusing for them.
Yeah, awesome. Um, have you guys been using any tech in scheduling softwares, like apart from P6, or any tech supplementing the data or the information you get from P6?
Yeah, I mean, we're going through a golden age of tech and planning and scheduling right now. There are loads out there. When I worked at Google, I just literally researched as many possible companies and spoke to as many possible companies as I could. And I guess how I view the market now is in a couple different buckets. And so I think you have, I will call like a visual based progressing bucket, where there are companies that will walk out, scan your site. These are the XYZs, the Doxels, the Bill Dots. Apologies if I missed your company. But they'll walk out, scan your site, compare it to past sites, and compare it to the model, and then give you progress off it. I think there's a lot of applications for this, and automating progress operationally saves a lot of time and money. And then it's going to unlock new capabilities in the future, because they're able to pick up a level of progress that we've never been able to before. So going back to my original example of like a schedule isn't really tied to the physical world, there's a reason for that, because as you start to do that, you create such a detailed plan and schedule that it's not manageable. And that's where like the production planning and the TAC planning comes in. But they only go out so many weeks. And the reason why they do that is because you like human beings physically can't like manage all that detail, right? Because it's such a fluid plan. It would be absolutely nuts, right? Could you imagine if I asked you to do like a poll plan, but like for the whole project that's like 10 months? Like you're gonna get to a point where you're like, I don't even know. I've ran out of stickies, our expo markers are gone, and I'm just done for. But we're moving to a place where that could potentially be possible because of the scanning cap. So that's one bucket. You have another bucket that I'll call like advanced analytics, right? And so that's your nodes and links, your in plan, your I'm forgetting the third one, but that's essentially these companies are applying modern computing to construction, right? And so you can do things that you historically couldn't in record speed, and you're getting better analysis and it's faster. And again, they're applying like LLMs and other sorts of things into your schedule checking. And then you're seeing a whole wave on the TAC planning, construction planning, pole planning side of companies that are in that space because nothing's really ever existed there. So you have, I'm going to forget all of their names now that I'm on the spot, but um, yeah, so you have Planera is one that it's pretty darn interesting, and you have Visilean that's super interesting. And these companies are basically just adding that like modern solution to the pole planning space. So you can do it digitally. So they have a digital whiteboard, and it can tie in to a bigger schedule, and it can tie into the model. I mean, there's a whole load of capability there. But it's wild because with all of these, then I mean, you can't forget Alice as well. So Alice is another one where it's really taking 5D, I'll call it 5D or spatial constraint scheduling to the maximum, right? Where you create a set of recipes, and that are basically like work packages for the people out there. And then you build those recipes up, and then it can run a plethora of mathematical combinations to optimize your schedule for cost, for time, for resources. I've seen a pretty interesting demonstration where they take, a schedule and that is being delivered late, and then they show you how you can optimize your resources to deliver it on time. um, but it's crazy because you rewind the clock 5, 6, 8 years ago, none of these companies existed. And so that's why I feel like we're at the tipping point of a golden age of some really cool tech in the planning and scheduling space.
Yeah, and I think you touched upon this, but you co-founded the computer vision construction team at Google. Do you want to elaborate more on how that thought came through and what were some of the findings through that project?
Yeah, to me, computer vision is huge, and it's not utilized enough in the construction space. And so, when we say computer vision, it's essentially using a video camera or a still image camera or lidar, basically anything that's going to go scan the physical world, and then give you data and information about it. And so, when I was a couple years ago, when I was working at Google, we were seeing, and you still see it I mean, dude, rockets land themselves. I don't know how much more do I have to say. Cars drive themselves. I like you just if you look out at other industries, there are things happening there that are just mind blowing, right? And so when you start looking at the trajectory of where this technology is going, that visual aspect is huge, and it's huge across all pillars of construction: safety, quality, planning, cost. It's something that it's going to unlock capabilities that we can't even fathom right now, and it's already offering a loads of value to sites right now. And so that was our hypothesis. And so we sat down and we thought about how many use cases can we just write out where this technology would be helpful. And I think we came up with like 200 or 250 of them. I mean, it was just they just were just rattling off, and some of them are pretty far fetched, and then some of them are very applicable. And so then we went through the process of like, okay, what it would be like an MVP for some of these areas, and what we could we do to go launch and build some of these capabilities. And we found it to be pretty darn easy. And there were some pretty easy wins and low hanging fruit that we could pick up and do. Um, and so that's what we went on and did. And I'm still huge. I think it's if you're not at least experimenting in the space, you should be, because it's where it's going. I mean, I think I had Matt Krass, the head of project controls for Google, on Beyond Deadlines podcast about a week ago, and I mean, they're still huge on it. I mean, they, drones and scans, and I'm so excited for where this is going to go in like the next 10 years. It's going to be crazy.
Yeah, with computer vision or the scanning technology, have you seen a substantial reduction in time when it comes to reviewing the job site, like by manual walking?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's just like, that's low dollar stuff. I mean, think about the things that you could catch ahead of time that would save you money on a job site. And so I think it does take the people walking, but it really, to me, it provides you a much richer data set that's far more valuable than, I don't know, like the $150 an hour or whatever you're paying somebody to go walk a job site. So to me, that's really where the value comes from. There's a couple different things you got to do. You have to build the capability first and the culture that it's going to use and execute on this data. right? Because I could take the fanciest thing in the world and drop it down, and if teams aren't ready to use it and embrace it, like it just doesn't catch on and go. And so I think there's that, like that use, like it, like the astronauts for SpaceX have to use the rocket. They're not like, oh, I'm not gonna, I want to land this rocket. No, they have to use it. It's different when you start implementing on-site construction. So there's that culture piece. Once you have that culture piece built up, then it's like, how do you find that value for each of your sites, and where does that exist? Do you want to tackle it in safety first, quality first, planning and scheduling, and where do you want to start kind of experimenting and testing out across your job sites? And that's where I think, you'll find better value, than just someone like reduce time by not walking the job site, and then someone will be like, well, you could just sit at your house and never go to the job site. It's like, all right.
um, Segueing to the next section, I know you like to do a lot of situational questions, so I've got a couple for you.
Oh man, turn the tables on me.
Yeah, you're on the hot seat today.
It feels hot.
So, for someone like a student who is at a school and he wants to get into construction, scheduling, and planning area, what are some of the skills he or she should focus on?
Yeah, like I think the best thing about planning and scheduling is that there's a huge demand for it. I mean, the demand is crazy. Like in our newsletter, I send out 3 jobs every week. I find 3 awesome jobs every week for 52 weeks now, all over the world. So, like, when we start talking about, oh, is there demand? Oh, there is a demand there. And when there's demand, it's easy to get into. And so I think, you know, um, I would say if you're interested in it and it's something you want to pursue, like you just got to go for it. You got to lean into it and go for it. And so, yeah, having a construction degree helps out. But guess what, folks? I don't have one. I don't have a construction degree. So I think you need to understand some principles of construction, and you need to understand the software. But both of those pieces can be picked up while you're still in school, and you can also learn about them online. Uh, and like the certificate courses that cost hundreds of dollars, you can get pretty close to for free. You want to learn Primavera P6? You can literally download it for free. But that'll just is like getting you in the door. I mean, to me, there's like I have a huge blog post that lays out, like, here's how your resume should look. Here's an example resume. Here's how you go find jobs. Here's how you go apply to jobs. Here's everything you need to go pick up. And so to me, um, like interest and passion for it is probably the biggest thing. You need to find out if this thing's for you. And typically it's like, to me, I found is like, do you like data? Do you like figuring out how things work and go together? And then can you talk to people? Because that's the one thing that I think early on separates different schedulers, is that can you just sit down and regardless of if the person is an engineer, a project manager, or whatever, can you have a conversation with them? Because that's how you kind of get the planning juices flowing, and you can, and it kind of how you pull the team together into a planning space. And so, yeah, this to me is how I would, recommend someone to get started, is like just have a passion for it and go for it.
Got it. And you mentioned having being able to have a conversation. So the second question is someone fresh out of school, working at a company, their first 3 months, what should they be focused on and how they should communicate?
Their first 3 months, oh man, you're taking me back. Well, make sure you get that 401k set up, right? Get your health and saving accounts set up. No, I mean, to be serious, I think when I first started, what I guess I didn't fully understand, because I didn't like my internships and where I worked. I was like a lifeguard. I didn't get into a large Fortune 500 company until later in my career, and even that was an eye-opening shock. And so, in your first 3 months, to me, I think month one should be just meeting people and getting yourself set up and ready to go. So I mentioned before, as we're kind of kidding, but I'm being serious. Like, get all of your benefits set up, get that out of the way, make sure you understand your health care and all that stuff, So, I mean, I've just seen it happen sometimes where like 6, 8 months down the road, something happens or whatever. And it's like, whoa, if your company's giving you stock, like make sure you sign the letter to accept the stock. Like, I mean, um, and then meet people, and when you meet people, you're not going to form these like deep lasting relationships with them when they take you around the cubes and they're like, hey, this is Sid, welcome to the team, Sid. But you're going to put a name with a face, and then you're going to be able to come back. And so I think in month 2, my thought process is you start growing those relationships more, and you start asking people, hey, I just want to kind of shadow you for like 15 or 30 minutes to understand what you do, can you show me? And then that way, that keeps you starting to build those relationships, and then you can start figuring out, like, and then month 3, I would kind of pick a couple of those people and try and provide value to them. So if it's, this project manager you met who's doing the cooling towers, oh, like, hey, hey, Sue, we met a couple of bits ago. You showed me all about the cooling towers. I was just going through the schedule and I want to make sure I have this right. It looks a little funny, and you start kind of building that, like, hey, person that, hey, I provide value. I'm here, like, and I'm actively engaged. So I would say that's it. But you know what? Did 3 months will go by so fast. Like, just if you show up on time, smile, and have a good attitude, you'll probably be fine.
Yeah, and talking about career progression, so Micah and Greg has a book upcoming, which is called the Critical Path Career, and you shared a snippet. There was a section about career progression and how you should plan it. Do you mind just touching upon that, on what ideal 1 year, 3 year, 5 year plan should be, and how to develop that?
Yeah. Well, to start out with, you should have a 1 year, 3 year, 5 year plan. And I mean, I remember when I was starting out my career, it's very hard. Like, you don't know what you want to do. You have no idea like where you're going to go, what you want to be. And it's all kind of crazy. I mean, my first job out of college, I worked for a chemical company in credit collections. I mean, like, if I did a 1 year, 3 or 5 year plan, like my 5 year plan would be like, I'm the king of selling like borax or something, right? Like, um, but it is good to kind of start laying out some of those things and figuring out what you want in life. I think that's probably what's going to help direct your career the most, and then help set up your 1 to 3, 1, 3, 5 year plan. One of my favorite books all time is, I think it's called Lifestyle Design, or Designing Your Life. I'll send you a link and you can put it in the show. But essentially, like, people like to view life as this like linear trajectory up, right? Like, oh, if I get this job at Skanska, then I can get this job at Google, and then I become a vice president, and it just kind of goes and goes and goes, right? But what really is there is life is like this like tree branch of roots. And all the past possibilities are gone, but you have all these future possibilities of what these potential outcomes could be. And so you just need to kind of start defining what some of these outcomes are and how they align to what you want in life, right? And so if you want to live in Chicago and make $300,000 a year and have a family and live in a good suburb or something like that, you know, if you think about all the tree branches out there, there's a section of those tree branches that will help get you towards that goal. And there's a section that aren't, and so that's how what you want in life is a really big determinant of what that 1, 3, 5 year plan is. And so to me, that's the big step, is starting to kind of figure out, and folks, it's going to change. You're going to change as a person. Things are going to change in your life. It doesn't mean that those big things can't change, but they'll shift a bit, but that's where you're grounded. And then as you start to go look through that, your 1 year plan to me is really just job execution. Okay, like, I'm in my job, how do I do really well at it? Because your 3 year plan is like, what is that 1 year execution going to set up in 3, right? And your 5 year is just kind of 2 steps ahead of that. You know what I mean? So I think if I could take it back to someone who's pretty early on in your career, maybe you're like in a junior PM role or a PM role, and you have this grand vision of being like a senior VP at a top 10 GC. Okay, right? Like, well, so year 1, that's probably not a 5 year journey to begin with. And so you're going to end probably at a senior PM or director, maybe at 5 years, shoot for the moon, land in the stars. And so year 1 is probably just executing at your job. Like, how can I get from junior PM to senior PM the fastest? Right. And then that's to be like, and then your 5 year goal will be ending at that senior PM. And so your 3 year, then that middle part is like, okay, I'm going to need to hit these projects and take these roles and pick up these skills, and then like for 5 year, I wouldn't even put any plans in that bucket because there's not really any point, right? It's just, and that's kind of how I would look at it. Establish what you want in life. That's going to drive 90% of your decisions. And then once you kind of get what you want, break that down into the 1, 3 year, 5, right? 1 is near term execution. 3 is, what are the kind of strategic pieces that you're going to need to set up? And then 5 is just kind of that end goal.
Awesome. Micah, this was super insightful. If someone wants to reach out to you, what's the best way?
LinkedIn, just DM me on LinkedIn. You can find me on there pretty easily.
Yep. Well, really appreciate your time. This was great.
Thank you, Sid. I appreciate it. Love the show. This is awesome.
Thank you for tuning in to Constructing Tomorrow. I hope this episode provided valuable insights and tips. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and drop a review or a comment. Until next time, keep building and stay curious.